Hello, everyone. This is Professor Sexton with a video lecture on Ralph Ellison's short story King of the Bingo Game, and also a sample conflict paper. The sample conflict paper is based off of Ellison's story, so that's why I'm giving them to you both at the same time. Keep in mind that the story can be found in course readings, and the sample conflict paper, as well as the paper assignment that goes along with it, can be found in course documents. There's just a few things that I want to point out about Ralph Ellison's King of the Bingo Game. And so, what I want to do is, first of all, I want to talk about the importance of setting. Even though the story that I presented to you doesn't give a year date on the story, but it's set during the 1930s, the 1940s, which was a time of the Great Migration here in the United States. And during the Great Migration, what has happened was a number of Black Americans from the South moved to the North, cities like New York, and also west to Chicago. And so the protagonist in this story is one of those people who has moved from the South to the North. And what it does in the first paragraph is somewhat establishes the difficulties that he's found when he's moved. So when he's sitting in the movie theater in that very first paragraph, one of the first things that we learn is that he's hungry. And he alludes to a woman in front of him eating peanuts. And the reason why that is so significant to him because he is hungry. And he makes a comment that if he were in the South, all that he would have to do was to ask the woman to share her peanuts, and she would. And he also makes a comment about a group of men drinking, and he also says the same. He has the same thoughts that if he were in the South, all he would have to do is ask for them to share a drink with him, and they would. But he points out that in the North, people are not as friendly as that. However, later in that first paragraph, there's a contradiction because one of the men in the theaters does actually share his drink with him. So, in some ways, this protagonist is romanticizing the South because in that first paragraph, he mentions how there was more of a sense of community there, and almost as if it was better in the South. But you have to keep in mind that he left the South to come north. So if it was that great, why did he leave to begin with? And you notice that in the North, there are issues that he's having. I mean, he's broke, he's hungry, he can't get a job because he doesn't have a birth certificate. And we also learned that there's a woman in his life named Laura, and that Laura is ill, and he doesn't have the money to take Laura to the doctors. The story never really tells us what the relationship is between the protagonist and Laura, whether Laura is his wife, a sister, or a mother. But the question that you have to ask yourself is, does it really matter the nature of their relationship? Because she is sick and he's not able to provide for her. So he's in this movie theater and you realize that he's seen this movie three times and you start to ask yourself, why would he go to this movie three times? But you also learn that at the end of the movie there's a bingo game, and so the real reason why he's there is for this bingo game because there's a possibility that he could win money, and I think the prize money is $36.90. Now keep in mind for 2022, $36.90 does not sound like a lot of money, but if we're talking about 1930s, $36.90 is a lot of money. And even for now, if 2022, $36.90 is more money than someone who has $0, right? So it's all relative. So he's sitting there in the theater waiting for his chance to play this bingo game because he's putting a lot of hope that this bingo game will change his life. And more importantly, that if he wins, he'll be able to have the money to take Laura to the doctors and she can survive or get treatment for whatever illness that it is that she has. He does acknowledge that he cheats because he has five bingo cards. Um, and so that even implies that, to a certain extent, that this system, um, in order to win at this system, you had to cheat the system by having five bingo cards. And he knows that in having 5 bingo cards, it's kind of difficult for him to keep up with the numbers. But all the same, he does. And he ends up winning. And so once he wins, he gets up to do this wheel. And it's, the best way to describe it would be like a wheel of fortune, wheel of fate, wheel of destiny. And what he does is he has to press this button. And if the button lands on 00, then he wins the prize money. What happens is when he gets up there to press the button, all of a sudden he feels like he's in control, because what the beginning of the story has emphasized that he doesn't have control, right? I mean, he's moved to the north, he can't find a job, he can't take care of Laura or whoever she is. And so by having this button, he now feels like he's in control. And once he gets up there, you can see that psychologically in his mind, he starts to go through these different things. Because on the bottom of page 3, he says, this is God. This is the really true God. He said it out loud. This is God. And it's a sense of control, because he now feels like he's in control. But what happens is he holds on to the button too long. And so other people in the audience starts to get upset that he's holding on to the button, because they are not getting their chance to participate in this game of fate. And so he holds on it too long, and his psychological mentality just kind of spins out of control, because eventually he says to himself, I'm the king of the bingo game. And this is what he believes. Now, why he's come to this conclusion that he's the king of the bingo game, there could be a number of factors. I mean, we already know that he is hungry and that he hasn't eaten in quite some time. We know that he's burdened with the stress of Laura's illness. So there's a lot of things happening in his life that might lead us to believe why he's feeling this way. Also, he's feeling this sense of alienation and isolation. So keep in mind, like in the very beginning of the story, he talks about that sense of community that he had in the South. Well, now he's in the North, and that community is not there. So he's feeling a little bit of alienation and isolated from people as well. So there's all this sense that he's kind of like in control of his destiny and his fate, which brings up a question that Ellison is dealing with in the story. How much are we in control of our fate and our destiny? This protagonist believes that he is, but it seems that he's not. What's also interesting too is as he holds the button longer and longer, taking more time than he should take, or at least according to the caller of the bingo game and the audience members, the police are called. And so they are going to arrest him. But here's the irony of the story. As he holds the button down, the button does go to 00. So he actually does win. However, the man in charge of the bingo game winks. And then the police come and they deal a blow against his head. So even though the protagonist wins the $36.90, the conclusion of the story is that he's not going to get that money. Now, King of the Bingo game is a difficult story. I understand that. And one of the things I want to point out about this story too is notice that in the story, you never get the name of the protagonist. So the story is 6 pages long, and nowhere in that story do you get the name of this protagonist. You don't even really get the full relationship between he and Laura. Ellison has done this before in works of his. Ellison has a novel called Invisible Man, which is about 700, 800 pages long. And it's in the 700, 800 pages of Invisible Man, you never learn the name of the protagonist. You don't know who that main character is. He's not given a name. And I always find that it's very significant in a work of literature when we're not given the name of a character, because an author could give a character a name. I mean, obviously, he or she's created the character, so they could give the person a name. So when a character is not given a name in the story, it always raises alarm bells for me, because then I ask myself, why has the author chosen not to give this character a name? Now, in Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, the title of the work is Invisible Man. So if the man is invisible, your name is your identity. And so it kind of makes sense that for a novel called Invisible Man, that the main character doesn't have a name. In King of the Bingo Game, there are two possible readings of why this character doesn't have a name. You can read this character as being an everyman, that this protagonist stands in for every human being who feels that he or she can control their own destiny or their fate, that, if they're lucky, they can push the button that decides whether they succeed or fail. So that is one possible way of reading the story. Another way of reading the story is in terms of race. The protagonist in this story is a Black man in the North in the 1930s and the 1940s. There is allusion to the story about him being descendants of slaves and how, as a slave, the name that he was given is a given name and not his true name. And in his days, the protagonist, he gives himself a new name, the name of the king of the bingo game. So maybe in some senses, Ellison not giving this character a name is a commentary on the struggles that Blacks face when they migrated to the North. Both of those are possible readings, and both of those are possible interpretations of this story. As I said before, it's not the easiest story to understand, but I've given it to you because I want you to use it to look at a model of a sample conflict paper. So let me share with you a conflict paper assignment. It should be showing up just now. So here it is. Write an essay that explores the central conflict in any one of the stories in this unit. What is the nature of the conflict? When, where, and how does it develop or become more complicated as the story unfolds? How is it resolved at the end of the story? Explain if that resolution is satisfying or not. So remember in an earlier lesson, we discussed conflicts in literature and how they function and the different types of conflicts. So for this paper topic, what you would be doing is you would be exploring how a conflict functions in the story. And then what I've done is I've shared with you a sample paper that discusses conflicts in Ralph Ellison's King of the Bingo Game. I am not going to go over this sample paper verbatim, but what I would like for you to do is, first of all, read Ralph Ellison's story for yourself, then read the conflict paper assignment, and then read this paper to see how this author has dealt with that assignment, how this author in this paper discusses the central conflict, how it happens, when it happens, the development of the conflict, the analysis of the story that the author gives as she moves and explores how this conflict is played out in the story, and then also how she deals with the resolution of the conflict and whether that resolution to the conflict is a satisfying one or not. So all of this is done for you as somewhat of practice. So the story, looking at the assignment, and then looking at this paper assignment as an example, is all kind of practice about how to write about conflicts and stories. So hopefully it's helpful, and we'll talk about conflicts in more detail with some of the other stories that we'll talk about in this unit. All right, thank you. Bye.